Robert pushed the bank statement across the wood surface. The numbers were static, insufficient, and final. He looked at the rent due date, then back at the balance, and the gap between them felt wider than it had the month before. He gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned pale. The room was silent, save for the hum of a refrigerator in the other room and the distant, muffled sound of traffic outside. He reached for a stack of overdue notices and swept them into a pile, creating space for the book resting at the corner. He opened it to a marked page. His finger traced a single line about the power of consistent habits. He read it once, then a second time, letting the words settle against the backdrop of his mounting debt. The anxiety in his chest did not vanish, but it sharpened into something else. A resolve took hold. He sat back, the page still open, and stared at the wall. The path forward was no longer a matter of luck or timing. It was a matter of repetition. He closed the book, stood up, and walked toward the window, looking out at the city lights. The decision was made. The next morning, the room was still dark. Robert sat before his monitor, the screen casting a pale, artificial glow over his hands. He navigated to the investment portal. His pulse was steady, but his focus was narrow. He keyed in a sum, a fraction of his paycheck, an amount that barely registered against his monthly expenses. His finger hovered over the confirm button. It felt insignificant, a trivial gesture against the backdrop of his debt. He clicked. The progress bar loaded. The screen flashed a confirmation, and then it was done. He exhaled, pulling his hands away from the desk as if the keyboard were hot. That small digital movement was the first crack in his old life. He watched the account balance update by that tiny fixed margin. It was not a fortune. It was not a solution, but it was a beginning. He stood up, moved to the kitchen, and started his coffee. The routine of the day felt identical to the day before, yet something had shifted in his posture. He had initiated a cycle that did not require his permission to continue. He had cast the first stone in a foundation he could not yet see. The promise was made, silent and absolute, locked into the machine. Months passed, and the world outside Robert's window accelerated. His friends arrived at weekend gatherings in new vehicles, the chrome gleaming under the streetlights. They talked about upgrades, vacations, and the latest trends in consumer goods. Their lives seemed to be expanding in real time, visible and loud. Robert listened, his own bank account remaining a quiet, static digit on his screen. He felt the pull of the current, the urge to participate in the visible life they displayed so easily. One Tuesday, he walked past a dealership. He looked at the window display, then at his own shoes, and felt the sharp, familiar sting of being left behind. His friends were moving forward. He was staying still. He could have redirected his next transfer, bought the comfort, and silenced the feeling of insufficiency. The thought lingered for a moment, heavy and inviting. Instead, he turned his back on the dealership and walked home. He sat at his desk, opened his ledger, and keyed in the daily amount. The transaction cleared. The discomfort of the choice was immediate, but the promise held. He chose the slow, invisible path over the fast, hollow one. He did not upgrade his life. He upgraded his discipline. Years blurred into a singular, rhythmic pulse. The sharp resistance he once felt toward the daily transfer smoothed away, replaced by a quiet, mechanical necessity. He stopped checking the total balance every morning. He stopped calculating the distance to his goals. The action became as essential as breathing or setting his alarm. He logged in, keyed the figures, confirmed the transaction, and closed the window in one fluid motion. The process took seconds, yet it defined his entire existence. Friends stopped asking about his finances, assuming he was perpetually stagnant. He never corrected them. The silence of his bank account was not a lack of progress. It was the steady, unseen accumulation of pressure. He developed a callus of patience that no external trend could pierce. He worked, he returned to his desk, he executed the transfer. His life was stripped of the noise of consumption, leaving behind a core of absolute, unyielding consistency. He was building something that had no name yet, a structure of discipline that existed entirely beneath the surface of his daily routine. It was a private, meditative cycle, a ritual that anchored his days to a future he could not see, but which he felt becoming real with every passing season. The 10th year arrived with a chill that had nothing to do with the season. At the office, the usual rhythm of tasks broke. Monitors that once displayed project schedules now showed jagged, downward-trending charts. Robert sat at his desk, hearing the hum of the room shift. It was no longer a workspace. It was a theater of anxiety. Conversations dropped to whispers, then erupted into sharp, frantic debates about liquidity and losses. He watched a colleague 3 rows over, a man who had often mocked Robert for his frugality, frantically swiping at his phone with trembling fingers. The man stood up, his face drained of color, and paced the aisle, muttering about liquidation. The air in the office grew heavy, thick with the scent of stale coffee and raw, unfiltered fear. Every time a browser refreshed, a new wave of tension rippled through the rows of cubicles. Robert kept his own monitor set to his work portal. He felt the gravity of the situation pulling at everyone else. A desperate urge to react, to flee, to sell. He watched the panic take root in his peers, a contagion of uncertainty that made the very walls feel unstable. He took a slow breath, tightened his grip on his mouse, and looked at his own account. The storm was here. The market broke. The news feeds turned red, flashing updates that signaled total collapse. Across the office, the sound of panic became deafening. Chairs scraped against the floor, voices climbed into screams, and the frantic clicking of mice created a chaotic, rhythmic pulse of surrender. Everywhere Robert looked, people were frantically liquidating, hitting sell buttons with desperate, shaking hands to salvage what remained of their assets. The screen before him flickered with the same catastrophic data, but his fingers remained still. He saw the logic of the herd: fear, sell, retreat. He felt the cold weight of the collapse pulling at his own impulse to protect what he had built. He stared at his account login page. The cursor blinked, steady and indifferent to the turmoil. He ignored the shouts of his coworkers, the crash of a falling chair, and the mounting pressure to join the exodus. He typed his password. He navigated to the transfer menu. He entered the same amount he had committed to for a decade. He clicked confirm. The transaction processed without hesitation. While the room around him spiraled into a frenzy of loss, he leaned back, watched the confirmation appear, and closed his browser. He had not wavered. He had stayed the course. The rhythm of life shifted again. A nursery appeared in the quiet corner of his home, and the house filled with the sounds of a growing family. But with the joy came the crushing reality of new, unyielding demands. Medical bills arrived in thick envelopes, their white edges stark against his kitchen table. They piled up, a mountain of debt that seemed to grow faster than he could earn. Every time he sat at his computer to log his daily transfer, the bills stared back at him. The temptation to stop, to keep that small sum for the immediate crisis, became a physical weight in his chest. He spent long nights staring at the numbers, his hands hovering over the keyboard. The pressure to break his routine was immense, a constant, gnawing itch to sacrifice his future for the temporary relief of the present. He watched the balance of his checking account dwindle. He heard the clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the hours until the next payment was due. Yet, he reached for his keyboard. He opened the portal, ignored the stack of urgent notices, and hit the transfer key. He did not skip a single day. He turned his habit into a silent, unbreakable vow, choosing the long path even as the immediate walls closed in. The calendar turned to his 50th year, and the screen at his desk displayed a change that defied his previous expectations. Robert stared at the figures, blinking hard to ensure he was reading the decimal places correctly. The interest generated by his portfolio had finally crossed the threshold, exceeding the total sum of his annual salary. He sat back, the chair creaking in the stillness of the room, and watched the numbers fluctuate. It was no longer a matter of him chasing the money. The money had begun to chase itself. He had spent decades feeding the engine, and now the engine was running on its own momentum. The realization hit him with the force of a physical impact. His capital had turned into a workforce that never slept, never grew tired, and never demanded a break. While he sat in his chair, the accounts continued to climb, generating wealth in the quiet gaps between his breaths. The cycle of survival that had governed his life for decades had been broken. He watched the digits shift, a steady, relentless upward crawl that signaled his total liberation. He was no longer trading hours for existence. He had built a machine that sustained his life, and for the first time in his journey, he simply watched it work. 10 more years passed in a blur of steady, measured steps. Now 60, Robert sat in the same chair, in the same quiet home, but the air around him felt different. He pulled the archive from his digital files, a 30-year-long transaction log. It was thousands of entries, a sprawling map of his life carved into code. He scrolled from the very first transfer, back when he had been a young man counting every coin, to the final entry he had made just that morning. There was a profound stillness in the room as he read. The numbers were large, certainly, but they were just markers on a page. He looked away from the screen, letting his gaze rest on the empty space where his desk had once felt like a cage. The realization settled into his bones, heavy and clear. The true wealth was not in the stocks, the compounding percentages, or the total balance. It was in the man who had sat down every single day for 3 decades. Regardless of the market, the bills, or the exhaustion, he had built a legacy of persistence that existed entirely within his own character. He closed the log, leaned back, and felt the weight of that internal victory. He was no longer just the man who had invested money. He was the man who had mastered his own hand. Younger men often came to him, their eyes hungry for a shortcut, a specific stock pick, or a hidden market trend they believed he possessed. They waited for him to reveal a complex strategy or a moment of perfect timing. Robert would listen, then look at them, and offer nothing of the sort. He did not talk about volatile charts or the rise and fall of industries. Instead, he reached out and touched the worn corner of his desk. He pointed back to that first, small, disciplined action he had taken decades ago. He spoke of the days he felt tired, the days he felt doubt, and the days he chose to transfer money anyway. The secret was not in the accumulation of wealth, it was in the rejection of comfort. He had traded immediate ease for the long-term promise he made to himself. As he stood there, he watched the younger men try to process the simplicity of his answer. They wanted a formula, but he gave them a way of life. Consistency was the engine, the foundation, and the final result. It was the only fortune that could not be taken away, because it was not something he owned. It was something he had become. He looked out the window, satisfied, knowing the habit had been his greatest investment all along.